Today, we're diving into something that is every fast-growing business has to get right: people. More specifically, how to manage human capital risks while scaling across borders and cultures. Joining us is Ian Jenkins, Managing Director of Cander Consulting. With over 15 years of HR consulting under his belt, Ian works with high-growth startups and scale-ups, especially in the Middle East, helping founders and investors navigate the complex people challenges that come with expansion. He's all about practical strategies, whether it's building HR systems that scale, spotting risk before it becomes a problem, or bridging the cultural gap between Western business mindsets and MENA market realities. Hello, Ian. Good morning. How are you doing today?
Good morning, Moses. Yeah, I'm well, thank you. It's just about the afternoon where I am, but it's been a good morning, thank you. And you can always rely on the weather in the UAE, so I'm enjoying the sunny weather and the warmth, having just got back from my native UK, which is quite cold at the moment.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, it's we're not too far from the UK. I'm based in France. I'm currently in France, and the weather is getting slightly better, but not as good as Dubai, as we all know. I put together this intro based on our latest conversation and on the information I could find about you online. So before we go into everything else related to people, startups, HR, I would like you to introduce yourself, and I'm sure you will introduce yourself in a better way than I have.
Well, I don't know if I'm as articulate as you are, Moses, but thank you very much. Yes, so very briefly, as you say, I'm a HR professional. I've been in human resources in one form or another for the last 15 years. Primarily, I work with high growth, either financial technology or broader technology businesses, although I've done work with companies of all shapes and sizes over the course of my 15 years. I've been based in the United Arab Emirates for the last 10 and focused on Cander Consulting really for the last 2.5 to 3 years through a series of engagements, some of which have run for 18 months and some of which are short, sharp engagements to sort out a particular pain point for a client.
That's great. So HR is not only about recruitment, because companies take, and I remember as well when we talked the first time, you told me, yes, I wanted to talk about recruitment, and you told me, no, there's a big difference between recruitment and HR. Can you, in simple words, briefly describe what the difference is?
Yeah, I guess it's the difference between, if you're a football fan, where Chelsea should be in the league and where they are in the league. You can go and buy the best talent, or what appears to be the best talent, from all over the world. But if you don't do anything with it to make it function as a cohesive whole, once you've done that, the results that you want aren't going to be achieved. So, to a certain extent, recruitment is the first element of HR, getting the right people on board. I would argue there are some things you need to do before you start actively recruiting, but we're probably getting into semantics there. So yes, it's the first part of HR, but it really isn't the be-all and end-all. I would argue it's far more important what you do with team members when you get them on board, the development that you put them through, the culture that you build and breed, than purely just going out and recruiting. I think recruitment tends to get a lot of focus because the most obvious sign that something's not functioning correctly in an HR department often, at least to senior leadership, is that they don't see bums on seats, right? That they don't have a particular skill set that they believe they need. Quite often, particularly smaller, fast growth businesses, they realize too late that they're going to need some form of capability in a particular area. And so then there's a constant ticking clock on any given requisition. We need to get this, filled yesterday. And I can talk, as we go through our conversation, a little bit about how you can alleviate that. The obvious answer is that you make yourself aware you're going to need capacity ahead of time. But yes, recruitment is a small component of HR. It's an important one. It's where I spent the first 10 years of my career as well. I was an agency recruiter for a number of years, both in London and then across here in the United Arab Emirates.
Great. And so HR, in a few words, not only about compliance and admin, it's much more about, it's a human capital, as you mentioned the other day. So in your opinion, what is human capital risk? Can you develop a little bit on this?
Sure. So I talk a lot about human capital, human resources, people. There's lots of different, names or verbiage you can use, but we're talking about the same thing. It's how do you get people in and make them perform as effectively as possible? talking about it a lot as being a compounding issue. So if you're doing human resources well, so you're bringing in good people, you're developing them, you're making them want to stay with you, and you're giving the best performance out of them, your company becomes more successful and a nicer pace typically to work. You generate more revenue, or you get through your tech development quicker, so that you're getting closer towards generating revenue. Therefore, you're able to raise more money more quickly, more easily, or you're generating more sales or more profit, depending on what stage you're at as an organization. And therefore, you're reducing the frequency that you need to raise money. And therefore, that cycle repeats. If you do the contrary and you don't bring in the right people and you do nothing to develop them because we're too busy to do learning and development and there's not enough time, we need to worry about this quarter's numbers, not anything else, and then you lose them because your culture's not very good, well, then you make less money, or you make less progress towards whatever your organization's goals are, and therefore you struggle to raise money, and therefore it becomes more and more difficult to get the right people in place. So it's a compounding issue for me. Human capital risk really is the gap between those two things, and where might we be creating a gap between our optimum performance and a poor performance.
Yeah.
So that could be a lack of a clear performance management strategy. That might be that your average tenure is 9 to 12 months, when statistically you get the best productivity out of a member of staff typically in years 2 to 5. So any of those areas could be a risk. We also talk about governance. So, a very obvious human capital risk. Well, if you're in breach of labour law in a particular country, there's a risk associated with that. That could be reputational, that could be financial, that could be legal jeopardy. If you're a financial services company and your HR policy breaches the regulation of that country or of the regulator that you're working with there, you could lose your license in a very extreme situation. So that's what I mean when I talk about human capital risk.
In one of your posts, I remember you wrote that hiring the wrong person can actually make you lose years of your I don't remember how you phrased it, but you said something like, if you hire the wrong person, you might lose 4 years of work, something like this.
I don't think it was quite as extreme as 40. You can lose up to 70% of someone's annual salary in terms of trying to replace them, right? So that's one stat that I talk about a little bit. I actually think the bigger risk, we've all hired, or most of us that have worked in business have hired somebody who's turned out to be absolutely the wrong person at least once.
But on the case, maybe look at the perfect person. That's something we'll go into as well. It's hard.
Sure, and we can talk about how interviewing is the least terrible option we've got in terms of bringing people on board, but it's still not brilliant. And that resolves itself typically quite quickly. If you hire somebody who absolutely refuses to connect with your culture, or you hire somebody who's obviously lied on their CV and can't deliver the technical competence that you require, that resolves quite quickly, and that there is a cost associated with that, and nobody wants to do that. I actually think the more damaging bad hires are the ones that just aren't quite right. And they sit in the job maybe for 2 or 3 years and they're okay. They're that, somewhere between a 2 and a 3 on the performance management set scoring if you're doing it 1 to 5. And they eat up a little bit more of your time and energy than you really want them to as a manager. And they're not developing. They don't really want to engage with your culture fully. Whenever something's going wrong, they're the folks that are saying, oh, this is terrible and woe is me, rather than trying to, find a solution. And I actually think it's those hires that cause the most damage, because it takes a long time to work out what the opportunity cost of that is, versus having somebody who's really good and really...
That sounds like a bad love relationship. Like don't right? Like that's probably say.
Yeah, I mean, I was fortunate not to have many of those, and then to have one really good one. So I picked an star candidate for my marriage, so that's wonderful. And well, we'll see. I don't know if she'll be watching this at some stage in the future or not. But if you are, my darling, I love you. But no, it is, as you say, I've seen friends waste years and years of their lives because they haven't found somebody that really wants to engage with them in the way they really want to be engaged with. And sometimes that's because, and this goes back to the recruitment piece, they didn't really know what they were looking for when they went into the situation. And sometimes, again, taking it back to a working environment, perhaps their needs change or their desires for a relationship change, and that can have a fairly substantial impact on whether somebody's the right hire as well. They might well be the best CMO for a 30-person business, but at the point you're a 300-person business, that person may be either out of their depth or simply they are best when everything's a little bit chaotic and it's very fast-paced, and that's just not the nature of your business anymore.
That's very interesting. Okay, so how do you get leadership teams or leadership leaders make that shift? How do you get them to understand the importance of making the right hire? And what is the process? Let's say I'm a company and I'm calling Ian and I want to hire somebody for a specific position. What's this look like?
Sure. So as I've said, Moses, I don't personally do recruitment, but my business partner, Sam, runs cander, which is a recruitment company here. And funnily enough, they were my client previous to me coming to work in the cander consulting business. So I've known Sam a long time. And I think the honest answer as to how do you convince hiring managers they need to hire the right person, well, there's two things. The first is they hire the wrong person, and there's nothing like that. So make them self-realize that actually they really need to hire the right person. And the second is if you have an organization that has well-defined OKRs, and those OKRs are then broken down effectively into departmental KPIs and individual KPIs for people. If you have a leader that needs to deliver against a particular number, a particular measure or metric, and it should be, in my view, their total reward is tied to that, so that could be a variable bonus or something. If you can demonstrate the value that one candidate might give to that metric versus another, it becomes a fairly straightforward decision. Do I want to do well or not do so well? The challenge is, as we've very briefly touched on thus far, is that it can be difficult to do over the course of maybe 3 hours of interviews and reading through a CV. That is quite challenging. And I think I don't think there are many hiring managers that don't understand the benefit of hiring a good candidate. I think they often just either don't know how to, or the company that they're working for isn't providing them the resources to do that. And again, to very briefly think about that, if you've got a business that has, let's say, $10 million in turnover, and you've got a sales team of 20 people, say, each of them bringing in $500,000, it becomes quite easy to see, well, if I hire somebody that's at 20% better than the current incumbent or better than the other option as a candidate, that generates X in terms of additional revenue. I that can be a little bit more difficult to work out sometimes with roles that are in technology or roles that are in, say, finance or perhaps areas of a company that are sometimes seen as a cost center, like, for example, human resources, sadly, is often seen that way. But if you don't have the budget to go out and get the right people, either because your salaries aren't in the right space for the market, or you don't have the right strength in your TA team or external agencies to deliver, the really good candidates, then that can often be the challenge. It isn't that people deliberately go out and hire somebody who's suboptimum. Of course they don't. They've got to manage that individual. It's just sometimes they don't really understand what good looks like because they haven't had a proper think about it beforehand.